The algorithm of worth. The crystal chandelier above the dining table cast fractured light across the white tablecloth, creating diamonds that danced with every subtle movement. Sarah watched one particular shard of light, letting it anchor her as her mother's voice crescendoed into that familiar register, the one reserved for profound disappointment. "We simply can't continue like this, Sarah." Margaret Chen's manicured fingers drummed against the stem of her wineglass. "You're 28 years old. 28. Your sister had made partner at her firm by your age." Across the table, Victoria, the aforementioned sister, sat with the posture of someone who'd been told since birth that she was destined for greatness. She probably didn't even realize she did it anymore. That slight elevation of her chin, the way her shoulders squared with unconscious superiority. She was scrolling through her phone with one hand, wine glass in the other, barely present but somehow still managing to radiate judgment. "Margaret, let's not," their father, Robert, began, but his wife's raised hand silenced him with the efficiency of decades of practice. "No, Robert, we've been patient, we've been supportive, but enough is enough." Margaret turned her full attention to Sarah, and for a moment, Sarah felt like she was 12 again, being scolded for reading during a dinner party. "You sit in your apartment all day, doing God knows what on that computer. When people ask what you do, what am I supposed to tell them? That my daughter is, what exactly? A professional internet browser?" Victoria snorted, not even looking up from her phone. "She's an entrepreneur, Mom. That's what people call unemployment now." The barb landed exactly where it was intended. Sarah felt it lodge somewhere between her ribs, in that soft place where she kept all the things she told herself didn't matter. She took a sip of water. She hadn't touched the wine, and said nothing. "We're not trying to be cruel, sweetheart." Her father's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd had this conversation too many times. "We just want to see you settled, successful, like your sister." "Like Victoria," she repeated softly, tasting the words. She looked at her sister, really looked at her. The Cartier watch, the Hermes scarf draped artfully over her shoulders, the subtle glow of someone who never had to question whether they belonged in a room. "Yes, I suppose Victoria is very successful." "Damn right I am." Victoria finally set her phone down, giving Sarah her full attention for perhaps the first time all evening. "Director of Quantitative Analysis at Silvercrest Financial. Youngest person in the firm's history to lead the algorithmic trading division." "But you wouldn't know anything about that world, would you, Sarah? Actual high-stakes finance where real money moves based on real expertise." "Victoria," her father warned, but it was half-hearted. "What? I'm just being honest. We all tiptoe around it, but someone needs to say it. Sarah lives in a fantasy world. She's been working on something for what, 5 years now? 6? And we've never seen a single dollar from any of it. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad are still paying her rent, her health insurance, probably her groceries." "We don't mind supporting you, darling," Margaret interjected, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But we need to see some direction, some progress, something that indicates you're moving toward a real career." Sarah's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. "What would you consider a real career, Mother?" "Oh, don't do that. Don't make me the villain here." Margaret refilled her wineglass with more force than necessary. "A real career is what Victoria has, what your father has. Something with stability, prestige, a clear trajectory, not this hobby of yours." "My hobby. Your coding or programming or whatever it is you call it." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure it's very interesting to you, but let's be realistic. The world doesn't need another person tinkering with computers in their bedroom. The world needs doctors, lawyers, bankers. The world needs people who understand complex systems," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "People who can actually apply theoretical knowledge to practical problems. People who work with real companies, real clients, real stakes. Not people who, What is it you do again, Sarah? Build websites? Sarah's phone buzzed again and again. She reached into her purse, more to give her hand something to do than from any real interest in the notifications. But when she glanced at the screen, her breath caught. System alert. Sterling Technologies valuation finalized. Current worth $534 million. Bloomberg Terminal. STX AI mentioned in 47 financial publications today. Reuters. Goldman Sachs extends Sterling Technologies contract through 2028. She stared at the numbers, watching them blur and refocus. $534 million. The culmination of 6 years of work that her family had dismissed as a hobby. 6 years of 18-hour days, of teaching herself advanced mathematics, of building something that had quite literally changed how the financial world processed information. Are you even listening? Margaret's voice cut through her thoughts. This is exactly what I'm talking about. We're trying to have a serious conversation about your future, and you're on your phone like a teenager. She looked up slowly. Her mother's face was flushed with wine and frustration. Her father looked uncomfortable, the way he always did when forced to participate in emotional confrontations. Victoria had that smirk on her face, the one that said she'd won whatever invisible competition she'd been running since birth. I'm sorry, Sarah said quietly. You were saying something about my future. Your father and I have made a decision. Margaret straightened in her chair, preparing to deliver a verdict. We're going to stop the monthly allowance, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like smoke. Robert shifted in his seat, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. Victoria's smirk widened. We're not abandoning you, Robert added quickly, but we think you need some motivation, some real-world pressure to find actual employment. You've had plenty of time to play with your little tech projects, but it's time to grow up. We've arranged for you to interview at Robert's firm. Nothing glamorous, of course, an entry-level position in the administrative department, but it's a start, a real start. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart. That would be too dramatic, too simple. It was something harder and sharper, something that had been holding up the architecture of who she'd allowed herself to be in this family. The dutiful disappointment, the apologetic failure, the daughter who absorbed every criticism and wore it like a hair shirt. An entry-level position, she repeated, in administration. It's honest work, Robert said, defensively. Everyone has to start somewhere. Even Victoria started in a junior position, Margaret added, as if this was somehow encouraging. She worked her way up through merit and dedication. That's what builds character. Actually, Victoria said, leaning back in her chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. I started as an analyst, not administrative staff, but yes, everyone needs to prove themselves. She picked up her phone again. Speaking of which, I need to respond to this email. We're in the middle of implementing a new trading algorithm, cutting-edge stuff, the kind of work that actually matters in the industry. Sarah's phone buzzed again. She glanced down at it, almost involuntarily. LinkedIn, 247 new connection requests from financial sector executives. Email, Treasury Department requesting consultation on digital currency regulation. SMS from Marcus, Sterling Technologies COO. Sarah, the board wants to announce the Goldman Sachs deal publicly. Press release needs your approval. She set the phone face down on the table and folded her hands in her lap. The gesture was unconscious, something she'd done 1,000 times before when trying to make herself smaller, less obtrusive. But this time, she noticed it. Noticed how she'd trained herself to shrink in this room, in this family, in the presence of people who'd decided her worth before she'd ever had a chance to prove it. What algorithm? The question left her lips before she'd consciously decided to speak. Victoria looked up from her phone, eyebrows raised. What? You said you're implementing a new trading algorithm. What algorithm? It's proprietary, Victoria said, her tone making it clear that Sarah wouldn't understand even if she explained. Developed by an external firm we've contracted with. Revolutionary stuff. It's going to give us a significant edge in high-frequency trading, but I wouldn't expect you to understand the complexity. Try me, Sarah said softly. Something in her voice made Victoria pause. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, but then the mask of superiority returned, harder than before. It's a neural network-based predictive model that analyzes market sentiment in real time using natural language processing, Victoria recited, as if reading from a press release. It processes news feeds, social media, financial reports, millions of data points per second, and identifies patterns that human traders would miss. It's basically the future of algorithmic trading. Sarah nodded slowly. And this external firm, what's it called? Sterling Technologies. Why? Victoria's eyes narrowed. Don't tell me you've heard of them. They're incredibly selective about their clients. Only work with top-tier financial institutions. Sterling Technologies. Sarah repeated. The name felt strange in her mouth, like a secret she'd kept for so long that speaking it out loud required translation. That's interesting. Interesting, Victoria laughed. Sarah, these people are operating on a level you couldn't possibly comprehend. Their founder is a ghost. No one knows who actually runs the company, but their algorithms are so sophisticated that Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, they're all using Sterling systems. Do you understand what that means? The biggest players in global finance are dependent on this technology. What Victoria is trying to say, Margaret interjected, is that this is the kind of company that matters, the kind that creates real value. Not these little startups or whatever it is you think you're doing. Sarah's phone lit up with another notification, the screen bright against the white tablecloth. This time, she didn't hide her interest. She picked it up deliberately, unlocked it, and opened the Bloomberg Terminal app. Breaking. Sterling Technologies, STX.AI, confirms $500 million plus valuation in Series D funding. Founder identity remains undisclosed. She read the headline twice, feeling the words settle into her bones like stones. $500 million. The number was almost abstract, too large to connect to the late nights in her apartment, the thousands of hours of code, the moments of brilliance and frustration and breakthrough that had built her company line by line, algorithm by algorithm. Sarah. Her mother's voice was sharp now, cutting. Are you even listening? We're discussing your future. This is important. I know, Sarah said. She set her phone down again, but this time she didn't hide her hands. She left them flat on the table, palms down, claiming space. This is important. Finally, Victoria muttered, some recognition of reality. Victoria, Robert warned, but there was no force behind it. Sarah looked at her sister, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. She saw the designer clothes, the perfect posture, the phone that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. She saw the confidence born from never having to question whether she was enough. And underneath it all, she saw something else. Fragility. The kind that comes from building your entire identity on external validation. Tell me more about this algorithm. The one from Sterling Technologies. Victoria sighed dramatically. Why? So you can pretend to understand it? Sarah, I don't mean to be harsh, but you're out of your depth here. This isn't coding in the way you probably think of it. This is advanced machine learning, predictive analytics, real-time data processing at a scale that requires incredible infrastructure and expertise. It uses a hybrid architecture, combining convolutional neural networks for pattern recognition with recurrent neural networks for temporal analysis. The natural language processing component isn't just sentiment analysis, it's contextual understanding. It weights different information sources based on historical reliability and cross-references with market movements to identify causality, not just correlation. The table went silent. Victoria stared at her, mouth slightly open. Margaret had frozen with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Robert had stopped pretending to be disinterested. How do you... Victoria started, then stopped. Did you read about this somewhere? It processes approximately 4.7 million data points per second. And it's not just predictive, it's adaptive. It learns from its own decisions, refining its models in real time, based on market response. The latest version, version 7.3, deployed 3 weeks ago, includes a risk assessment module that factors in geopolitical events, regulatory changes, and even weather patterns that might affect agricultural commodities. That's... Victoria's face had gone pale. That's classified information. How could you possibly... It also has a fail-safe protocol, Sarah said, meeting her sister's eyes. In case of market anomalies that might indicate manipulation or system-wide failure, It automatically reduces trading volume and sends alerts to compliance officers. That protocol has activated twice since implementation. Once during that flash crash last March, and once during the Singapore exchange incident in July. Both times, it prevented significant losses. The silence that followed was different now, heavier. Margaret set down her wine glass with a hand that shook slightly. Robert had stopped pretending to be disinterested. Victoria looked like she'd been slapped.
How do you know this? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah's phone lit up again. This time, she picked it up and unlocked it with deliberate slowness, letting them see the screen. She opened her email and found the one from Marcus, sent 20 minutes ago. The subject line read, "Board meeting confirmed for tomorrow. Sterling Technologies public announcement pending your approval." She turned the phone so they could see it, then scrolled down to show the signature line. Marcus Chen, Chief Operating Officer, Sterling Technologies. Direct report to founder and CEO. "I know," Sarah said quietly, "because I built it." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward, touching everything, changing everything. Victoria laughed. It was a high, brittle sound. "That's not funny, Sarah. It's not a joke. You're saying—" Margaret couldn't seem to finish the sentence. She looked at the phone, then at Sarah, then back at the phone as if the screen might suddenly rearrange itself into something that made sense. "You're saying you work for Sterling Technologies?" "No." Sarah set the phone down and met her mother's eyes. "I'm saying I am Sterling Technologies. I founded it 6 years ago. I wrote the first version of the algorithm in my apartment, the one you've been paying rent on. I built it from nothing, tested it, refined it, and then I found clients who were willing to take a chance on an unknown company with revolutionary technology. That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction now. She was staring at the phone like it might bite her. "Sterling Technologies is valued at—" The founder would have to be worth approximately $534 million as of 2 hours ago, give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations. Robert made a sound somewhere between a cough and a gasp. Margaret had gone completely white. "This is insane," Victoria said, but she was already pulling out her own phone, fingers flying across the screen. "You can't just claim to be the founder of—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face draining of color as she stared at whatever she'd found. "Oh my God." "What?" Margaret demanded. "Victoria, what is it?" Victoria turned her phone around slowly. On the screen was a Bloomberg article, published 15 minutes ago. The headline read, "Exclusive. Sterling Technologies founder identity revealed. Sarah Chen, 28, confirms leadership of 500 million plus AI firm." "There must be another Sarah Chen. She's a common name." "It's not common," Robert interrupted. His voice was strange, distant. He was looking at Sarah with an expression she'd never seen before. Something like awe or fear, or perhaps the dawning realization that he'd fundamentally misunderstood something crucial. "Why didn't you tell us?" Margaret's voice cracked on the last word. "I tried." Sarah's voice was gentle, but there was a weight underneath it that made everyone stop moving. 3 years ago, I tried to explain what I was working on. You said it was a waste of time. You told me to get a real job. 2 years ago, I mentioned that I'd secured a major client, Goldman Sachs, actually, and you assumed I meant I'd gotten a job there. You threw me a party for finally getting serious about my career. I didn't correct you because I realized you'd never actually asked what I did. You just assumed I was failing." "We didn't." Robert trailed off, unable to finish the lie. "You did," Sarah said simply, "and I let you. I let you believe I was a failure because it was easier than fighting for you to see me differently. I let you think I was living off your charity because confronting you felt like too much work. And maybe part of me thought I deserved it. Your disappointment, your judgment. Maybe I thought I needed to prove myself on such an enormous scale that you'd have no choice but to see me." She picked up her water glass, surprised to find her hand steady. "But tonight,
When you told me you were cutting me off? When you offered me an entry-level position in administration like it was some great salvation? I realized something. I don't need to prove anything to you. I never did. The only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. Sarah, sweetheart. Margaret reached across the table, but Sarah pulled back. Let me finish. Sarah's voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made everyone stop moving. Victoria, you said your department is implementing Sterling Technologies' algorithm. Do you know who approved that contract? Victoria shook her head mutely, her face ashen. I did. 3 months ago, your department head, James Rothschild, I believe, presented a proposal to implement our system. I reviewed it personally. I approved it because the technology is sound and your department would benefit from it. But I had no idea it was your department. I didn't know because you'd never told me where you worked. Not specifically. You just said algorithmic trading at a top firm. I didn't connect it until tonight. She pulled out her phone again and opened a different app. This one showing a complex dashboard of financial data, market analytics, and company information. She navigated to a specific section and turned the screen toward Victoria. This is the back end of the Sterling Technologies client management system. See this? She pointed to a highlighted section. That's your department's account. You've been using version 7.3 of our algorithm for the past 3 weeks. The results have been impressive. Your trading efficiency is up 43%, and you've avoided 2 potentially catastrophic trades that your previous system would have executed. Your department head has been very pleased. She stared at the screen like it was a window into an alternate dimension. Those reports I've been presenting to the board, the ones showing our improved performance?
Based on my algorithms, Sarah confirmed. And that's not all. She navigated to another section of the dashboard. Sterling Technologies isn't just about algorithmic trading. We've diversified significantly over the past 2 years. See this subsidiary? Sterling Properties. We acquire and manage high-value real estate in major metropolitan areas. She zoomed in on a specific entry. The address made Margaret gasp. That's our address, she whispered. That's this house. Yes, Sarah said calmly. I purchased it 11 months ago through one of Sterling Properties' LLCs. The previous owners were looking to sell, and I offered them above market value. You've been paying your mortgage to a company I own. I've been, effectively, your landlord for almost a year. Robert's face had gone from white to red. That's not possible. We would have been notified. You were notified, Sarah said calmly. You received a letter from Sterling Properties explaining that your mortgage had been sold to a new entity and that your payment details were changing. You signed the paperwork. I have copies if you'd like to review them. She swiped to another screen. Then there's Sterling Holdings. That's our investment arm. We've acquired stakes in various businesses, including... She paused, letting the moment stretch. The Meridian Club. Margaret made a small, wounded sound. The Meridian Club was where she spent 3 afternoons a week playing tennis and having lunch with the wives of other successful men. It was her sanctuary, her social fortress. The club was in financial trouble. Bad investments, mismanagement. They were looking for a buyout. We acquired 67% ownership 8 months ago. I'm now the majority stakeholder. Which means, Mother, that when you signed in today at the front desk, you signed into a building I own. The silence was absolute. Sarah could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away seconds that felt like small eternities. And Victoria, Sarah said, turning to her sister, remember how proud you were when your department got that new office space last month, the one with the view of the harbor? Victoria nodded mechanically, her eyes glazed. Sterling Properties owns that building too. We bought it 2 years ago as part of a larger portfolio acquisition. When Silvercrest Financial needed to expand, they leased the entire 17th floor from us. I approved that lease personally. I also approved your salary indirectly. Sterling Technologies' contract with Silvercrest includes performance bonuses tied to algorithmic efficiency. Your department's improved results
have earned everyone's substantial bonuses this quarter, including you. Stop, Victoria whispered. Please stop. But Sarah didn't stop. Couldn't stop now that the truth was flowing out of her like water from a broken dam. I'm also part of a consortium that recently purchased a significant stake in Silvercrest Financial itself. We are not the majority shareholders, not yet, but we are the largest single voting bloc, which means that when the board meets next month to discuss departmental restructuring and leadership appointments, my voice will carry considerable weight. She met Victoria's eyes, and for the first time in her life, she saw her sister look small, frightened. The golden child, the one who'd always been certain of her place in the world, suddenly confronting the reality that the foundation she'd built her superiority on was someone else's creation. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Sarah said, and she meant it. I'm telling you because you need to understand something. Success isn't what you thought it was. It's not the designer clothes or the corner office or the prestigious title. Those are just decorations. They're the wrapping paper, not the gift. She looked around the table at her family's shocked faces and felt something shift inside her. Not satisfaction, exactly. This didn't feel like victory. It felt like, finally, after years of holding her breath, being able to exhale. For 6 years, I've been building something real, something that actually matters. My algorithms don't just make money, they make the entire financial system more efficient, more stable. They've prevented crashes, identified fraud, helped businesses make better decisions. I've created jobs for 237 people. I've donated $47 million to educational programs that teach underprivileged kids to code. I've changed things. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that felt final. And I did it all while you thought I was a failure, while you pitied me, while you planned to give me an entry-level job out of charity. She pulled her purse over her shoulder. I don't need your support, financial or otherwise. I never did. But I would have liked your respect. I would have liked for you to ask me about my life instead of assuming you knew what it was. Sarah, wait. Margaret was crying now, tears cutting lines through her makeup. We didn't know. How could we have known if you didn't tell us? I did tell you, Sarah said quietly. You just didn't listen. There's a difference. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. But before she reached it, she turned back. I'm not angry, and she realized it was true. I'm not even hurt, not really. I'm just tired. Tired of making myself small for people who never asked me to be large. Tired of apologizing for taking up space. Where are you going? Robert's voice was hoarse. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened a text message chain with Marcus. She typed quickly. Public announcement approved. Full disclosure, press conference tomorrow at noon. Home, she said. My actual home. Not the apartment you've been paying rent on. I own that building too, by the way. The penthouse. I've lived there for 2 years, but I kept up the pretense of the smaller apartment because it was easier to explain. She sent the text, then looked up at her family one last time. If you'd like to see it, you're welcome to visit. I'll send you the address. But you need to understand something first. When you come to my home, you come as guests, not as people doing me a favor by tolerating my existence, not as parents condescending to check on their failure daughter, as guests who respect the person I actually am. And who are you? Victoria asked, her voice small and broken. I'm someone who was always here. You just never looked closely enough to see me.
The elevator to Sarah's penthouse required a special keycard. She pressed it against the reader and felt the familiar hum as the car began its ascent to the 42nd floor. Through the glass walls, the city spread out below her like a circuit board, all lights and connections and invisible currents of energy. She'd half expected her phone to explode with calls and messages after she left, but there was only silence. Maybe they were too shocked to react. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Or maybe, and this felt most likely, they were frantically Googling her name, trying to verify that everything she'd said was true. The elevator doors opened directly into her apartment. No hallway, no neighbors,
Just 3,200 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and expensive art that she'd bought because she genuinely liked it, not because it was an investment. She dropped her purse on the entrance table and kicked off her heels, padding barefoot across the cold marble floor to the windows. The city glittered beneath her, and she pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the slight vibration of the building swaying in the wind. Her phone buzzed. Not her family, a text from Marcus. Press release went live 10 minutes ago. Bloomberg, Reuters, WSJ all picked it up. Your phone's going to explode soon. Prepared? She typed back, as I'll ever be. Another buzz, this time an email notification from her assistant. Tomorrow's schedule. Bloomberg interview at 8 a.m., WSJ at 10 a.m. Press conference at noon. Forbes wants an exclusive for their cover story. Should I confirm? Sarah stared at the email, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Tomorrow, she'd stop being anonymous. Tomorrow, the whole world would know her name, would attach her face to Sterling Technologies, would analyze every decision she'd made and every dollar she'd earned. Tomorrow, there would be no more hiding. But tonight she was alone in her penthouse, looking out at a city that didn't know or care who she was, and that felt like freedom. She poured herself a glass of wine, better wine than her parents served, she noted with grim amusement, and settled onto her couch. Her laptop was already open, showing the Sterling Technologies dashboard. She scrolled through it absently, checking metrics that she'd checked 1,000 times before. Revenue projections, user statistics, client satisfaction scores. All the numbers that quantified her success, that proved she wasn't the failure her family had believed she to be. But none of it felt real. Not the money, not the company, not even the shocked looks on their faces when she'd revealed the truth. It all felt like a story happening to someone else, viewed through thick glass. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Victoria. For a moment, Sarah considered not answering, but curiosity won out. Hello? I verified everything. Victoria's voice was flat, drained of its usual confidence. I called my department head. I checked the company records. I looked at the building lease. It's all true. Yes. I've been working with your technology for months. I've been presenting your innovations to the board as if I had something to do with creating them, and the whole time you just let me. Sarah took a sip of wine. What was I supposed to do? Call you and say, hey sis, I'm the founder of the company whose algorithm you're using. You would have thought I was lying. Or crazy. I don't understand. Victoria's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell us? Really tell us, I mean. Force us to listen. Because I shouldn't have had to force you, Sarah said quietly. Because if I had to prove my worth that dramatically just to get your respect, then your respect wasn't worth having. Silence on the other end. Then, I've been so horrible to you. Yes, Sarah agreed. You have. And you just took it? For years? Why? Sarah looked out at the city, at all those lights representing all those lives, each one carrying their own complications and hurts and moments of brilliance and failure. Because you're my sister, she said finally, and because I kept hoping that someday you'd see me, really see me, not the version of me you decided I was. I kept thinking that if I just waited long enough, if I just stayed quiet and small enough, eventually you'd look past your own assumptions and notice that I was here. But you stopped waiting, Victoria said. Tonight, you stopped waiting. Tonight, I realized I'd been waiting for something that was never going to happen on its own. So yes, I stopped waiting. Another long pause. Sarah could hear breathing on the other end, uneven and thick. Can I come over? Victoria asked suddenly. To your penthouse. Can I see it? Sarah closed her eyes. Why? Because I want to see where you really live, who you really are. I want to... Victoria's voice broke. I want to start over, or at least try. And I know I don't deserve that chance, but I'm asking anyway. Not tonight, Sarah said, not unkindly. Tonight, I need to be alone. But tomorrow, after the press conference, you can come. You and Mom and Dad if they want to.
I meant what I said. You're welcome in my life, if you can learn to see me. How do I do that? Victoria whispered. How do I learn to see you when I've been blind for so long? Start by asking questions instead of making assumptions. Start by listening when I answer. Start by understanding that my path doesn't have to look like yours to be valid. Okay, I can try. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her penthouse, the city lights painting shadows across her face. Tomorrow would be chaos, interviews and press conferences, and the sudden jarring experience of being seen by millions of people who knew her name but not her story. But tonight, in the quiet space between who she'd been and who she was becoming, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. The press conference room was smaller than she'd expected. Or maybe it was exactly the right size, and her anxiety was just making the walls feel closer than they were. Sarah stood backstage, watching through a gap in the curtain as journalists filled the seats, their phones and recorders and cameras creating a forest of technology pointed at the empty podium. Marcus appeared at her elbow, holding a tablet. 5 minutes. Are you ready? No, Sarah said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. He smiled. That's kind of your thing, isn't it? Doing impossible things anyway. Is it? She looked at him, this man who'd been her COO for 3 years, who'd believed in her vision when it was just lines of code and wild ideas. Sometimes I think I just stumbled into all of this. Like I accidentally built an empire while trying to solve a puzzle that interested me. The best empires are built that way, Marcus said, by people who care more about the problem than the power. He handed her the tablet. Your opening statement, but you don't have to stick to it. Speak from the heart. That's when you're most convincing. Sarah scanned the words on the screen. Carefully crafted sentences about innovation and market disruption and the future of financial technology. All true, but also somehow not quite right. Not quite her. 2 minutes, someone called from the front. She handed the tablet back to Marcus. I'm going to improvise. He didn't look surprised. Good. The prepared statement was boring anyway. The walk to the podium felt both endless and instantaneous. One moment she was backstage, and the next she was standing in front of 100 journalists, their cameras all trained on her face, capturing this moment for posterity, or scandal, or whatever it would ultimately become. The room went quiet, that expectant hush that precedes something significant. Sarah gripped the edges of the podium and took a breath. My name is Sarah Chen, she began, and her voice didn't shake. And I built Sterling Technologies because I couldn't find a job. A ripple of laughter, surprised and genuine. 6 years ago, I graduated with a degree in computer science and applied mathematics. I was good, really good, but I didn't interview well. I was quiet, introverted, and I didn't know how to sell myself in those 20-minute conversations that determine your worth in someone else's eyes. She could see people leaning forward, pens moving across notebooks. I got rejected from every company I applied to. Google, Facebook, Amazon, all of them. I got form letters thanking me for my interest and wishing me well in my future endeavors. And I started to believe what those rejections implied, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't have what it took to succeed in this industry.
Sarah paused, letting the words settle. In the front row, she spotted Victoria, sitting next to their parents. Her sister's eyes were red-rimmed, but focused, locked on Sarah's face with an intensity that felt like attention. Real attention, for the first time in years. So I stopped applying, and I started building instead. I was interested in a problem that had fascinated me since my undergraduate thesis. How do you teach a machine to understand context the way humans do? How do you create algorithms that don't just process data, but actually comprehend the relationships between different pieces of information? She released the podium and stepped to the side, her body language opening up. I spent 18 months in my apartment, teaching myself advanced machine learning, studying market behavior, and writing code.
I lived off savings, and then, when that ran out, off the charity of parents who thought I was wasting my life. My family called it a hobby. They told me to get a real job. They looked at me with pity and disappointment. And honestly, I didn't blame them, because from the outside, I looked like exactly what they thought I was, a failure living in a fantasy. A hand shot up in the audience, but Sarah shook her head gently. Please, let me finish. There will be time for questions. The hand lowered. But here's what they didn't see. What no one saw. I was building something revolutionary. Not because I was trying to prove them wrong or because I wanted to be rich, but because the problem fascinated me. Because every breakthrough felt like solving a puzzle that had been locked inside my mind since I first learned to code. The money, the success, the company, all of that came later, almost as a surprise. She walked back to the podium, her fingers trailing along its edge. When I finally had a working prototype, I didn't know how to market it. I didn't have connections in the financial industry. I didn't have a prestigious degree from an Ivy League school or a network of wealthy investors. What I had was an algorithm that worked better than anything else on the market, and the audacity to email Goldman Sachs directly. More laughter, this time mixed with murmurs of disbelief. I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? Some nobody sending a cold email to one of the biggest banks in the world, claiming to have solved a problem their entire quantitative analysis department had been working on. But I didn't know I was supposed to feel intimidated. I just knew my algorithm worked.
She glanced at her notes, then pushed them aside completely. They responded, not because of who I was, they had no idea who I was, but because I included a demonstration. I showed them exactly what my system could do, with real data and verifiable results. And someone there, some analyst whose name I still don't know, took it seriously enough to pass it up the chain. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more confident. That's how Sterling Technologies started. Not with venture capital or a flashy launch or a carefully planned business strategy. With one email, one demonstration, and one person willing to look at the work instead of the resume. She paused, scanning the crowd. I'm telling you this because I think we've forgotten something crucial in the tech industry, in business, in life. Success doesn't look the way we've been taught to expect. It doesn't always come from the right schools or the right connections or the right performance in an interview room. Sometimes it comes from someone working alone in an apartment, driven by curiosity rather than ambition, solving problems because they can't not solve them. A journalist in the back called out, unable to contain himself. But you're worth over $500 million now. Surely you can't say that money and success aren't connected. I'm not saying they aren't connected. I'm saying the money is a result, not the goal. It's the measuring stick that society uses to quantify value, but it's not the value itself. The value is in the technology we've created, the systems we've improved, the stability we've brought to markets that affect millions of people's lives. Last March, there was a flash crash in the Asian markets that could have cascaded into a global crisis. Sterling Technologies' algorithms detected the anomaly 7 seconds before any human trader did. 7 seconds. Our systems automatically reduced trading volumes, sent alerts to compliance officers at 17 different institutions, and prevented billions of dollars in losses. That's value. The money I've made is just how we keep score. The room had gone completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to be holding their breath. I'm sharing my identity today, not because I want publicity or recognition, but because I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of letting people assume I'm something I'm not. And I'm tired of living in a world where we only value success that looks a certain way, comes from certain places, follows certain paths. She straightened, her voice dropping to something quieter, but somehow more powerful. Yesterday, my family told me they were cutting off my financial support. They offered me an entry-level job out of pity. They thought they were doing me a favor, saving me from my delusions. And you know what? I don't blame them. Because I let them believe I was failing. I hid my success because some part of me was afraid that if they knew the truth, they'd love me for the wrong reasons. They'd love the success instead of the person. In the front row, Margaret Chen had started crying again. Robert sat beside her, his hand covering his mouth, his eyes wide and glassy. But here's what I realized. By hiding, I was doing exactly what I claimed to be fighting against. I was saying that my worth only mattered if I could prove it dramatically. I was saying that being seen required being spectacular. And that's wrong. Sarah's voice strengthened with conviction. We all deserve to be seen for who we are, not just what we've accomplished. We all deserve respect and attention and love that isn't contingent on our net worth or our job title or our place in some imaginary hierarchy of success. And maybe, by stepping into the light, I can help change the conversation about what success looks like and who gets to be considered successful.
Can you? Sarah met his eyes. Because yesterday, you were ready to cut me off. Yesterday, you thought giving me an entry-level job was an act of charity. What happens the next time I do something you don't understand? What happens when I take a risk that looks foolish from the outside, or pivot my company in a direction that seems strange to you? Silence, heavy and uncomfortable. I don't know, Robert admitted. I want to say I'll trust you completely, but I don't know if I can promise that. I've spent your entire life thinking I knew what was best for you. I've spent your entire life measuring your worth against some imaginary standard. And you're right, that was wrong. But I don't know how to just stop doing it. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. The honesty, painful as it was, felt like the first real thing her father had said to her in years. Then here's what I propose. We start over, but we do it honestly. You accept that you're going to make mistakes, that you're going to fall back into old patterns. And I accept that change is hard, that you're not going to transform overnight. But we commit to calling it out when it happens. We commit to having uncomfortable conversations instead of letting resentment build. And if we can't, Victoria asked, if we try and fail? Then at least we tried, Sarah said. At least we gave each other the chance to be better. Margaret reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly, and placed it over Sarah's. I want to know you, the real you, not the version I made up in my head. Will you let me try? Sarah looked down at their joined hands, her mother's, weathered and elegant with age, her own, younger, but marked with the tiny scars of late-night coding sessions and broken glass from the time she'd thrown her laptop in frustration. Yes, she said. I'll let you try. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her penthouse, watching her family explore the space with genuine curiosity. It had taken time to get here. Weekly dinners that were sometimes awkward, phone calls that didn't always go well, moments of backsliding and frustration. But they were trying, all of them, to build something new from the rubble of what had been. Victoria was in the corner, examining a piece of abstract art that Sarah had bought from an emerging artist in Brooklyn. This is stunning. How did you find her? I spend a lot of time in galleries. It's how I decompress. I see something, I feel something, and if it speaks to me, I buy it. No investment strategy, no art consultants, just me and the work. Victoria nodded slowly. Over the past 3 months, she'd been learning to ask questions, to listen to answers, to see her sister as a full person rather than a competitor or a cautionary tale. It wasn't always smooth. There were still moments when her old superiority crept in, when she compared their successes as if they were racing toward the same finish line. But she caught herself now, apologized, and tried again. Margaret was by the windows looking out at the city. Do you ever feel lonely up here? It's so high up, so separate. Sometimes, Sarah admitted, but loneliness isn't about altitude. I was lonely in my old apartment too, surrounded by people who didn't see me. At least here, the loneliness is honest. Her mother turned, and Sarah could see tears gathering in her eyes. I'm so sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm so sorry we were too blind to see what you were building. I know, Sarah said, and she did. They'd had this conversation, or versions of it, many times over the past months. Each apology chipped away at a little more of the hurt, made a little more room for something new to grow. Robert was examining the bookcase, running his fingers along the spines of coding manuals, philosophy texts, novels in 3 languages. I've been reading about machine learning, trying to understand what you do. Most of it goes over my head, but I'm trying. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. That means more to me than you know. She paused, gathering her thoughts for the conclusion. Sterling Technologies is more than just my company. It's a statement about possibility. It's proof that the kid working alone in their apartment might be building the future. That the person who fails every interview might still be brilliant. That success can come from the most unlikely places if we're willing to look beyond our assumptions about what successful people are supposed to look like. She took a breath and delivered her final words. So yes, I'm Sarah Chen. I'm the founder and CEO of Sterling Technologies. I'm worth more money than I know what to do with. But more importantly, I'm someone who spent 6 years being underestimated. And I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done making myself small so other people can feel comfortable. And I'm done hiding my light because people might be uncomfortable with its brightness. She stepped back from the podium. Now I'll take your questions. The room erupted. Hands shot up, voices called out, cameras flashed. But Sarah's eyes found Victoria's across the chaos. And in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or the first fragile threads of a new relationship being woven. The questions came rapid fire, and Sarah answered each one with the same measured honesty she'd brought to her opening statement. She talked about the technology, the company's growth, her plans for expansion. She discussed her philanthropic initiatives, the coding schools, the scholarships, the grants for women in STEM fields. She even admitted that she'd been terrified of this moment, of being seen. But that terror was better than invisibility. An hour later, when the press conference finally ended, Marcus appeared at her side to guide her through the crowd of journalists, still clamoring for one more question, one more quote. "You did good," he murmured as they made their way backstage. That was the most authentic tech founder statement I've ever heard. No corporate buzzwords, no rehearsed sound bites, just truth. Sarah smiled weakly. Is that a compliment or a criticism? In this industry, definitely a compliment. He handed her a water bottle. Your family's waiting outside. They asked if they could see you. She hesitated, the water bottle halfway to her lips. All of them? All of them. Sarah nodded slowly. Give me 5 minutes, then send them to the conference room. The conference room was smaller, more intimate than the press venue. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the harbor, where boats cut white lines across blue water. Sarah stood with her back to the view, her hands clasped in front of her, when the door opened. Her parents entered first, moving with the careful steps of people walking through a house they thought they knew, but that had somehow rearranged itself overnight. Victoria came last, closing the door softly behind her. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just stood there, a family of strangers learning how to look at each other again. You were magnificent, Margaret said. Her voice was hoarse, raw from crying. Up there, at that podium, you were absolutely magnificent. Thank you, Sarah said simply. Why didn't you tell us? Robert's voice carried the weight of a question that had been asked and answered, but still needed asking again. Really, Sarah, help us understand. Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the water. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. Because I needed to know that I could do it alone, that I could build something real without anyone's validation or approval or financial support. I needed to prove to myself that I was enough, exactly as I was. She turned back to face them. And because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew about my success, it would change how you saw me, that you'd love the achievement but still not see the person, that you'd be proud of the company but still disappointed in who I was. That's not... Margaret started, but Sarah held up a hand. Let me finish, please. She took a breath. I was also afraid that I'd lose my motivation, that if you started respecting me, started treating me like I was successful, I'd stop trying to prove myself. And that drive, that need to prove I wasn't a failure,
That's what pushed me to build Sterling Technologies into what it is today. So we helped, Victoria said softly. By making you feel like you had to prove yourself, we accidentally helped you succeed? No, Sarah said firmly. Don't do that. Don't reframe your cruelty as some kind of favor. You didn't help me succeed. You made me feel like I had to earn basic respect and dignity. Those are two very different things. Victoria flinched, but didn't look away. You're right. I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry isn't magic. It doesn't erase 6 years of being dismissed and belittled. It doesn't undo all the times I came to family dinners and left feeling like I was worthless. Then what do we do? Margaret's voice broke on the last word. How do we fix this? Sarah considered the question. Really considered it. She could feel the weight of this moment, the way it would define their relationships going forward. She could close the door on them, cut them out of her life entirely. She had every right to do that. Or she could offer them what she herself had needed for so long, a chance to be seen. You learn, she said finally. You learn to ask instead of assume. You learn to listen instead of lecture. You learn that my version of success is just as valid as Victoria's, even if it looks different. She walked to the conference table and pulled out a chair, sitting down and gesturing for them to do the same. Slowly, hesitantly, they joined her. Here's what I need from you, Sarah said with her hands flat on the table. I need you to understand that I'm not going to perform my success for you. I'm not going to constantly update you on my company's valuation or show you my bank statements or prove over and over that I'm worthy of respect. I need you to trust that even when you can't see what I'm building, even when my path doesn't make sense to you, I know what I'm doing. We can do that, Robert said quickly. Too quickly. He pulled out a book, a worn copy of Gödel, Escher, Bach, and flipped through it. You've always been brilliant. I see that now. I think maybe I always saw it, but I was too caught up in wanting you to be brilliant in a way I could understand, in a way I could explain to my friends at the club. And now? Sarah asked. He put the book back carefully, aligning it with the others. Now I tell them my daughter built something I can't fully comprehend, and that makes me prouder than any title or position ever could. Sarah crossed the room and hugged him, something she hadn't done in years. He stiffened for a moment, surprised, then wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. I'm going to keep making mistakes. I'm going to keep not understanding things. I know, she whispered back, but you're trying. That's what matters. They broke apart, both slightly embarrassed by the display of emotion, and Sarah laughed, a real laugh, free and unguarded. So, she said, clapping her hands together, who wants the grand tour? I haven't even shown you the best part yet. There's a best part? Victoria asked. This place is already incredible. Sarah grinned and led them down a hallway to a door she'd kept closed. She opened it with a flourish, revealing what had once been a bedroom, but was now something else entirely. The walls were covered in whiteboards filled with equations, code snippets, diagrams that looked like art and mathematics had a baby. 3 monitors displayed cascading streams of data. A standing desk held a laptop, surrounded by reference books, coffee cups in various states of fullness, and a small succulent plant that was somehow thriving despite the chaos. This is where the magic happens, Sarah said. This is where I work when I can't sleep, where I solve the problems that keep me up at night, where Sterling Technologies actually comes from. Her family stood in the doorway, taking it in. Not the pristine office they might have imagined, not some sleek corporate space, but something messy and alive and deeply personal. It's perfect, Margaret said softly. It's so perfectly you. And Sarah realized with a start that her mother was right. This room was her. Not the version of herself she'd learned to present to the world, but the real, unfiltered person underneath. Brilliant and messy, focused and scattered, driven by curiosity rather than ambition. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Let me show you what I'm working on now. As her family filed into the room, asking questions and touching things with careful reverence, Sarah felt something she'd been chasing for years without knowing it. Peace. Not the peace of proving herself, not the peace of being successful or wealthy or recognized. The peace of being seen, really seen, by the people whose opinions had shaped her for so long. Victoria picked up a notebook filled with Sarah's cramped handwriting and sketches. "What's this?" "A new project," Sarah said, leaning over her sister's shoulder. "I'm trying to develop an algorithm that can predict and prevent financial fraud before it happens. It's complicated. It involves pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, network mapping. I'm probably 6 months away from even a working prototype." "But you'll figure it out," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "Eventually," Sarah agreed, "even if I fail 100 times first." "And if you do fail," Margaret asked, "what then?" Sarah smiled. "Then I fail, and I learn from it. And I try something else. Failure isn't the opposite of success, Mom. It's just part of the process." They stayed until sunset, until the light streaming through the windows turned golden and warm. They talked about Sarah's work, about Sterling Technologies' expansion plans, about the philanthropy projects she was funding. But they also talked about other things: books they'd read, movies they'd seen, small moments of beauty or frustration or joy that had nothing to do with success or achievement or worth. And when they finally left, when Sarah closed the door behind them and stood alone in her penthouse once more, she didn't feel lonely. She felt full. She walked back to her workspace and pulled up the code she'd been working on earlier. The algorithm was stubborn, refusing to behave the way she wanted it to. She'd been stuck on this particular problem for 3 weeks, and part of her wondered if she was approaching it from the wrong angle entirely. But instead of frustration, she felt excitement. The kind that came from knowing that somewhere in the tangle of logic and mathematics and creativity, there was an answer waiting to be found, and she had all the time in the world to find it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Thank you for letting us in, literally and figuratively. Love you, sis." She typed back, "Love you too," and meant it. She set the phone aside and turned back to her screens, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Outside, the city sparkled with the lights of millions of people living their lives, chasing their dreams, building their own versions of success. Sarah took a breath and started typing, because this was who she was, who she'd always been. Someone who solved problems because they fascinated her, who built things because she couldn't not build them, who succeeded not in spite of being underestimated, but because being underestimated had given her the freedom to define success on her own terms. The algorithm would come together eventually. Or it wouldn't, and she'd build something else instead. Either way, she was exactly where she needed to be. Seen, respected, free. And finally, after years of making herself small, taking up exactly as much space as she deserved. Epilogue. 2 years later, Sarah stood on a stage in front of 3,000 people at the Women in Technology Summit. She was older now, more comfortable in her own skin, though she still got nervous before speaking to large crowds. "I want to tell you about failure," she began, and the audience leaned forward, attentive. "Not the kind we usually talk about, the failure that leads to success, the valuable lessons learned, the temporary setbacks on the road to triumph. I want to talk about the failure that doesn't have a happy ending, the failure that just sits there, refusing to become anything else." She paused, letting the words settle. "Last year, I spent 14 months developing an algorithm that failed spectacularly. Not needed refinement failed, not showed promise but required more work failed, just failed. Completely. Utterly. Waste of 14 months," murmurs rippled through the audience. And you know what? It was devastating. I cried. I questioned everything. I wondered if I'd lost my edge, if Sterling Technologies' success had been a fluke, if I was about to be exposed as a fraud who'd gotten lucky once and couldn't replicate it. She smiled, and it was genuine. "But here's what I've learned. Failure is only wasted if you let it define you. Those 14 months weren't a waste, because I learned more about what doesn't work than I ever could have learned about what does. I learned humility. I learned that success isn't a straight line, and being good at something
doesn't mean you'll be good at everything. She looked out at the sea of faces, young women and men, old and young, all different colors and backgrounds, all united by their presence in this room, in this industry, chasing their own versions of success. My family used to see me as a failure, and honestly, I let them. I let them because it was easier than fighting to be seen. But what I've learned is this: being underestimated isn't a tragedy, it's an opportunity. It's the chance to work without the pressure of expectations, to fail without everyone watching, to define success on your own terms instead of someone else's. She took a breath. So if you're in this room and you feel invisible, if your family doesn't understand what you do, if people dismiss your dreams as hobbies, good. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're wasting your time. And then, when you're ready, when you've built something real and true and yours, step into the light. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. The applause started small and grew, filling the auditorium with sound that felt like validation, like recognition, like all the years of working in obscurity finally being acknowledged. But Sarah knew better now. The applause was nice, but it wasn't why she did this. She did it for the person she'd been 6 years ago, sitting alone in her apartment, convinced she was a failure, but unable to stop building anyway. She did it for everyone who'd ever been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as less than because their path didn't fit someone else's definition of success. She did it because being seen was good, but seeing yourself clearly was better. And in the end, that was the real algorithm she'd been trying to solve all along: how to calculate your own worth in a world that kept telling you the formula was wrong. The answer, she'd learned, was simple. Stop calculating, start building, and never ever apologize for taking up space. Dear Maya, a year ago, you made the hardest decision of your life. You chose yourself. And I know it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss, like destruction, like burning down the only life you knew. But here's what you built from the ashes. You built friendships that feed you instead of drain you. You built a life where your birthday matters. You built boundaries that protect your peace instead of sacrificing it. You built a version of yourself that doesn't need to be useful to be loved. And you did it without destroying anyone. You didn't scream or rage or burn bridges. You just stopped being the bridge. You learned that true revenge isn't destruction, it's boundaries. True power isn't control, it's choice. True love isn't sacrifice, it's presence. And you, Maya, are finally present in your own life. Happy birthday. From yourself. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the shelf next to the photo from her 30th birthday party, the one where she's laughing, surrounded by people who showed up, not because they needed something, but because she was worth showing up for. And as Maya looked at that photo, at the woman she was becoming, she realized something. She'd spent 29 years being the foundation everyone else built their lives on. Now, finally, she was building her own, and it was beautiful.